So, hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Tracy Stein, and I'm super excited to have Mara Bishop with us today. So, Mara is many things, and she'll tell you a little bit more about her journey, but she is a shamanic practitioner. She's a teacher, an author, an artist. She has a new book out that's really terrific, Shamanism for Every Day, 365 Journeys. So, we'll learn more about that as well. So, without further ado, welcome, Mara. I'm so glad you're here.
Hey, Tracy. I am very glad to be here.
So where should we start? I would love to hear more about your journey, and also just for you to explain for people a little bit more about what shamanism is and what it involves, and kind of how you wound up there.
Yeah, I think that's such a common question, and I've always find myself going, like where to start with that? You know, and sometimes I kind of want to start way back at the beginning for me and pick a different place. And what kind of comes up for me right in this moment is sitting in my childhood home, sitting outside in the backyard and looking at the little pond where I grew up, and always looking for animals and wildlife, and really developing these kind of maybe one-sided, but relationships with the nature that was around in that place where I grew up. So for me, a lot about spiritual practice is connecting with the natural world, right? I think in a lot of indigenous philosophy and shamanic philosophy, there's this idea of, nature, we are nature, right? There's not this kind of separate thing of, there's nature out there and then there's us, right? That there's this, we're all kind of one interconnected being, right? Nature's our family. And I didn't grow up in a shamanic culture. I grew up in kind of an eclectic religious, with different religions, right? And spiritual practices. So shamanism was something that I came to as a young person, but then found some interesting overlaps with experiences that I'd had in nature and through my own meditations. But that thread of really intimate experiences in the natural world and being inspired by nature and feeling that is kind of the home place. That's something that's kind of been my North Star, maybe personally, in the practice of shamanism, kind of through everything, right? Through everything that I do. So maybe defining shamanism would be a good point. And I want to be really careful that I think there are a lot of different definitions of shamanism, and not to claim to be an expert, because every different culture has their own way of practicing, right? So the word shamanism comes from the Tungus people of Siberia, right? It's a very specific word from a specific culture. But anthropologists then kind of applied that to many different cultures. So in the way that I'm using it and the way that I learned it, it's really a system of direct revelation. It's a spiritual practice, not so much a religion, but it's a way that we can find our own relationship to spirit, right? To our own spirit, to the helping spirits that exist all around us, right? To have our specific immediate direct connection to the divine, right? Without having some kind of intermediary, right? Without kind of a bureaucracy around it. And so in core shamanism, again, which is what I practice, there are some similarities across cultures. So this idea of direct revelation, again, this having a personal experience, which allows us to have an authentic practice that's not taking from somebody else's culture, right? It's not about the rituals or the practices of some culture that we don't belong to. This idea of nature. being important and part of everything.
Nature being universal.
Yeah. And that idea of a universal spirit that kind of infuses everything, right? That everything that is has a spirit too, right? Like we have our physical bodies, but we also have our spiritual bodies. And that's not just part of shamanism. There are all sorts of cultures, all sorts of religious practices, all sorts of healing modalities that have that as kind of a basic premise, right? We think about chi, we think about prana, that there are lots of overlaps, I think, with shamanism and with other belief systems or practices. There's kind of this aspect of the shamanic journey that is pretty specific and kind of maybe identifies shamanism within itself, of how we shift our perception and connect with helping spirits, however we want to define helping spirit, right? It might be the spirit of nature. It might be connecting with water. It might be connecting with an ancestral spirit. Might be connecting with the divine within you, right? That kind of answer your question a little bit?
A lot. And we're going to talk a lot more about it because, I was thinking that, when you're talking about connecting to the divine within, but doing so by connecting with the divine all around us, nature, animals, plant life, the earth, and maybe our various archetypes of different aspects of the divine. And for those of you who weren't here a few minutes before we started recording, your cat Luna joined us. And I find that animals are very much drawn to this process. And in fact, animals in our inner journeys, our shamanic journeys, or however we want to conceptualize them, or whatever language we want to use, but animals are very often guides to something greater within. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I know there are a lot of animal people who listen.
So I think there are different ways that we can approach our relationship with animals. So I guess I'll speak personally first. For me, it's so easy to love animals. And I think that, that's true for many people. There are a lot of people who feel like, they love animals more than people, right? It's easier somehow. There's something about animals that kind of allows our hearts to open. So they're kind of it's easy to practice devotion, right? So in whatever way that we're connecting spiritually, I think in so many ways, everything comes, hello, Luna, on cue, comes back to this idea of love and devotion and what are we devoting ourselves to, right? Where are we focusing our energy? So if it's easy for you to open your heart or have your heart open to an animal that's physically right there with you, right? Then that can be your personal practice in and of itself. That could be your spiritual practice, right? Every morning I sit down with my animals, and it's part of a meditative practice, but it's also kind of a loving devotional practice where kind of the tangible experience of love is, I give it to them and I feel like I get it back. Okay.
It's uncomplicated.
It's really uncomplicated, right? It's like, where you stand with animals, it's very uncomplicated. So there's that, without any kind of, I'm practicing this thing, or I'm practicing that thing, or I'm putting a label on it, right? It's just, it's like pure love. Then I think, as you're talking about archetypes or power animals, or like other ways of engaging animals, we think about one of the, beginning ways that if we're going to do shamanic journeys, right? Or we think about totem animals, or, that there's this kind of relationship to helping spirits that may take the form of an animal who are willing to come and help us personally, right? And I know for me, that was one of my first experiences with animals that were in spirit form, was in having meditations as, like a school age person, and particular animals would show up. And then later on, when I learned how to do shamanic journeying, like having those same animals appear and being able to say, oh, this is a familiar being, right? This is not an archetypal animal. This is an individual, right, with their own personality, that I can go back to and I can connect with over and over again. But then there's also the archetypal, when we think about kind of gods and goddesses and what the energy of those animals may mean on a level that's beyond the personal, right?
Right.
And how do we connect with them? In my energy ecosystem work, I work with animal archetypes. That's like your energy personality archetype in relationship to, how we think about our personalities and how we can understand them better when we think about animals. So it's like, okay, if you have like a puppy energy, or you have a bull energy, or you have a hummingbird energy, how might you navigate the world differently, right? Or you might have multiples of those, right? We're not just one, right? But understanding that you have aspects of those, you relate to people differently, right? Your energy is different. And when you meet other people with different archetypes, right, different tones to their energy, we interact differently, just like animals in nature.
So interesting that you're saying that, because, you don't even need a lot of explanation. If you say so-and-so has hummingbird energy, right away we have a sense of how they move, how they talk, how their attention is sustained, if they flit off after, versus bull energy versus cat-like, versus someone who has a very kind of canine type of energy to them. And one of the many things I like about your book is you really use metaphor and imagery of animals, of nature, of specific places, in a way that helps people get it. It's very simple, straightforward language. These are very concise practices, but that exercise I don't know if I'm going to phrase this well, but it's like exercising different muscles within our consciousness and within our spirituality. And so without having to explain so much, just having these metaphors and having these kind of imagery prompts, you get people to where you want them to go. And in fact, I'm looking at some of my notes. You talk about dreaming. You talk about everything from, accessing our creativity to just how to phrase our intention or our questions,
right?
So that they're more likely to yield a usable result.
Right.
So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that, because you draw actually from psychology. You mentioned loving kindness. You draw from, what I would say are psychological techniques, like, again, guided imagery. There's something very hypnotic about listening to drumming, and so forth. So you really brought that together in a very seamless way.
Thank you. I think you said a lot of things there that we're going to want to come back to.
Definitely.
The part about making the prompts in some ways easy for people to not have to be thinking every time that they sit down to a practice, what am I going to do? How do I frame this question? What do I really want to know? That's at the heart of what I was trying to do with this book. The practice of shamanism, and language is so important.
Yes.
Tracy, and I know as a teacher and as a writer, it's like you try and find the right words for things, but then sometimes the words themselves become kind of confining.
Yes,
right.
Definitely.
And I feel that I struggle sometimes with the word shamanism, right? Like I want to come up with, a word that word can be a little bit loaded, right? We want to be really careful that we're not borrowing where we shouldn't borrow, right? That we're being both as expansive as we can be, semantically, culturally, but also having enough definition that people know what we're doing. So that practice, what we're defining for our purposes here, right? And for my purpose in this book and in my life, changed my life so much, created such a profound experience of connection and knowing that I'm not alone. And, both in the times that feel joyful and the times that feel devastating. And it was just so incredible that, and the daily practice of it, without it being like, you've got to do this every day, you must do it this way to do it right, without that, made such a difference for me that I wanted to make it easier for other people to have some kind of similar experience. And I do I have an eclectic background, right? I've got the psychology background. I've got different faith practices in my background. I've got these things that keep me interested. I need different things to keep me engaged. And that's part of, for many people, not for everybody, I think what can help keep any practice engaging is that it's not the same thing all the time, but that there's enough consistency that you're not scattered. You're not just kind of everywhere all over the place, right? There's something there's a container, whether it's that you do it regularly or that, you are cycling through, something, or that you have a good balance of discipline and flexibility. So, for me, having a regular time, but then giving myself some leeway about what I do with that, right? Sometimes it's very specific questions. Sometimes it's just tell me what I need to know. Sometimes it's not about data. Sometimes it's just about looking at I'm looking outside a lot, just, because I am looking outside, literally. This is where my place is. So in Shamanism for Every Day, as you described that real spectrum of prompts, I try and encapsulate that, right? There is some dream work. There is some more, right brain kind of cognitive. Let's think about this, right? And then there's some more real fluid stuff where it's more creative or more just have an experience, or here's some options, right? For those of us who don't like being told what to do, like, here's some choices, or do something different, or don't do this today, like do whatever you want today. And to be really clear that this is not a book where you have to do it start to finish, right? A lot of people that I know, myself included, will, pick it up and do one of the, what do I need today, and open to a page, right? You can do it in order. You can do it randomly. People are sharing with me all different ways that they use it, which I love. And people of all different practices too, right? It's not just it doesn't have to be used by people who are experienced shamanic people, right? So ministers, people who are, definitely not going to do shamanism, but do meditation or do, Christianity or do something else, can adapt.
I'm so glad you said that, because really, there may be people who say, I want to further my training and my reading. And this is something that is really going to become a very formalized and core part of my spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. But probably for most people, it's going to be a way in to their inner world and to their own sacredness, right, that they can do at their own pace and their own level of comfort. But it doesn't have to be the thing. They're not going to finish the book and say, well, I am now a shamanic practitioner, right, or expert. And that's completely fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of go back to something you said a few times so far. And I think it's so great that you did. And it's really important because, what you're saying is that, it's important for us to be thoughtful about language and And sometimes it can be hard to feel like, know exactly what the quote right way would be to do that. But to give credit where credit is due and, give a nod to these various traditions that have been formed the way you practice, and you do that in your book. And I like and respect that. So everything from defining terms to different ways of accessing, again, the divine within and the divine in nature. And some of these things certainly seem to be quite cross-cultural, right? Especially things that are more, I don't know if it's iconic or archetypal, but nature as a way within seems to have a universality to me. So, and actually there's some research that shows that things like forest bathing, walking in nature actually does have a real psychological and health benefit to us, right? And, years ago, nobody would have said that probably has some scientific backing.
Right.
Would you say you like nature?
Right.
But this is a way when we can actually physically get in nature and use it as a doorway within, or in the unlimited scope of our own minds, we can sit down and connect. Yeah. I really I like that thread that runs through the book because it makes it very accessible and understandable.
Yeah, and actually, this Friday, I'm doing a talk at the Rhine Center's Shamanism, Nature, and Psychology. The thread of nature is huge, and actually, pretty much, I'm working more and more towards having much of my work be really centered around that, the healing aspect of nature, our relationship to nature, and doing that in a more deliberate and intentional way. It's always been part of it, but new things are coming this year that are even more kind of explicitly about that. And that's true. The data shows it, right? Whether we're in it, whether we're looking at it, whether we're imagining it, we do better, right? And that's when we look back at indigenous cultures and how those relationships were very reciprocal with the natural world, right? I mean, that matches up, as so often happens. It matches up with now what research is showing us.
I want to get back to the imagery in your book for a moment because, as you know, I'm a guided imagery person. And so, I think a lot about imagery. And when I read people's writing or I hear their imagery, I really, I'm probably paying attention to it in a little bit different way. I think the guidance that we give people, even if it's brief, can be so important. In your book, one of the things I noted that I thought, oh, this is really good, is that as you talk about people journeying to the lower world, the middle world, the upper world, and maybe you can describe those in a moment, but you talk about how, I guess, the importance of, yes, in our minds, we are unlimited, right? We're not constricted by the laws of physics that tend to govern us in daily life. So there's so much we can do, but how helpful and important it can be that if we were imagining ascending to an upper world, that being at a high perch, starting from a higher place, like a treetop or something, or a mountaintop, is helpful. Going to a lower world, I'm just thinking of how universal it is. I'm just using, this is just what comes to mind for me, but I've heard so many people, myself included, use this idea of a staircase going down.
Right.
Or descending into a valley or versus just finding a place, if we're going to be in the middle world, our kind of current reality, but we're exploring it imaginally and spiritually, to allow to come to mind a place where we have actually been, that is real for us, rather than laboring to create something. I thought that was really skillful and important. And it's kind of like, oh, of course, once I read it. But that's a lot easier for people, I think. A lot of people say they have a hard time visualizing. And if it's a place that you already are or have been, it is so much easier. People don't have to get caught up in overthinking. So I thought that was really, just really useful.
Mm-hmm. And I can't take credit for that, Tracy. That's part of kind of the core shamanic journeying practice. And I think it's really valuable. And I want to come back to the whole kind of your point about how important it is to seed people with the instructions about visualizing. So let me not forget to come back to that.
Of course.
But the part about kind of starting in a place that you've been, I think, is a really important aspect of shamanic journeying. It really grounds us. This is one of the things that I love about this practice. There's so many things I love about this practice, if you can't tell. But one of the things that I love about it is that there's kind of this, there's a groundedness to it. There's a balance to it. When I was taught these, like the method of journeying and why we journey, we're journeying with a purpose, that it's important that, that we know which world we're in, right? That a shaman, if they are doing their job, they are clear about where they are, that yes, you can, when you're journeying and you're in the upper world or the lower world, the possibilities may be different, but you don't come back into this world and then get confused and, you understand, right? It's like, you're traveling around, the laws of the country that you're in, right? Because you want to be able to operate at a high level in both places. So it involves different skill sets. You're not just kind of journeying to float off into space and just, woo, you have these amazing, transformative, mystical, full sensory experiences. But the point is not to just vacate our physical bodies, right? This is not about, we don't want to be here. We don't want to be in our bodies. We just want to ascend somewhere else, right? This is about how do we make the lives of our community, ourselves, our community better, right? How do we have balance here? It's appreciating the physical as well as the spiritual, right? So that was a long way around to having a departure place before you journey that is a physical place that you've been helps to really anchor I'm starting here, I'm going, and now I'm back, right? Now when I get up and I'm moving around, I know which laws of physics are going to apply to me, So I think that's one of those, parts of core shamanic practice, that's like a built-in safeguard, right? It's a built-in way of, okay, we're going to have this be a grounded practice. So I really appreciate that. What you said about seeding people's visualizations, I really appreciate that. I think people tend to assume that, and this is implied in the term, guided visualization, but I think it's more than that, right? We want people to have a full sensory kind of experience. So at least, particularly in journeying, I'm always kind of trying to navigate. I mean, I'm not usually doing guided. Sometimes I'm doing guided journeys. Usually I would call those guided meditations, right? You're having an experience. So if it's like a recorded ceremony or like the audio course that's coming out in the spring, that would be all recorded, right? Or classes that are taped. But if I'm suggesting, like in the book or something where I would say, just like go and do it for yourself, I would want people to feel like if their experience wasn't visual, that's okay.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be like, the movie flips on and you sit back and have it happen. Your experience, you might smell your journeys or you might hear it. We're a very, very visual culture, and that works great for some people. But if that's not your experience, that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's, I want to touch on the fact that these journeys are kind of innately hypnotic, right? Anything rhythmic, anything that helps us to go within, The minute we close our eyes, we're kind of a little bit entranced in a way, right? In that alpha state. And, so you have these guide rails that you have in place right from the beginning with, your directions about where to start and where you're going. You're also talking about the drumming and making sure that you use a track that has a callback.
Right.
So that again, people can reorient to the present and know when it's time to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't have to be, not only does it not have to be all visual, it doesn't have to have people don't have to feel like, oh my goodness, I'm going to float around and I don't know where I'm going to go. Right. So the prompts are helpful to create a parameter, but the callback, that auditory kind of guide rail is there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was so great. I'm gonna read to you a little bit about some of your imagery, because I think some of it's not some of it, but some of it is especially timely. One of the images you use, this is going to be very exciting for anybody who saw Fantastic Fungi, the movie, the documentary, which is fantastic, talks about this like whole world of mushrooms and how there's all this interconnectedness below the earth.
Tracy, did you just see that they're mapping it? That Jane Goodall, I just saw this in The Guardian, a friend just sent it to me this morning. There's this whole project where they're going to be mapping the networks.
I didn't.
Like globally, Jane Goodall's institute is like spearheading. That's
amazing.
I'll send you the link. It is so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no mushroom expert by any means. I definitely have taken medicinal mushrooms, and and they have culinary import. But what most people don't realize that there is this network beneath the earth where mushrooms are. You might see a few here and a few there, and yet there's this vast network, like a web beneath the soil, connecting trees, and it's a way of not only sharing nutrients, but communicating. It stabilizes the soil. There are all of these purposes. And in your book, you describe that in a way. And it's such a powerful metaphor for me of this kind of interconnectedness and this kind of all these layers to our world. And so again, you pull in elements, that are quite factual and specific to the natural world and to psychology and so forth. And it is a very wonderful metaphor for that kind of interconnectedness. Mm-hmm. As I'm thinking about that, just kind of this expansiveness that people have when they ask for higher guidance, whether it's from themselves or a particular guide or whatever. The practice of doing that and getting out of the confines of our personality selves and our immediate, all those things, all these external things that we identify with, right, that are important, but how that can create a greater sense of compassion for others and self-compassion.
Right.
So I really think there's a lot here in this book, so that it does. I'm not even sure that it really matters what someone's specific goal is when they start out. There are lots of other things for them to discover as they use these prompts.
I would agree. And the self-compassion piece is big. It's synchronicity is such an interesting thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like in the last couple of minutes, you've pinged on like 3 things that I was just doing this morning.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Somebody sending me the note about the, this mushroom network mapping, which you could tell, got me really excited. And Jane Goodall, she's just the most amazing human being, but, and I didn't know she was interested in I didn't know that was part of her thing, but anyway, so that was this morning. And then I was just writing a blog piece about self-compassion and, like being able to, bloom in darkness, like how it was a story about how I threw this piece of, cabbage under my sink for the compost. And it sat there for a while, and then I went to take it out, and it had bloomed, but it had grown into this really beautiful thing. And it kind of started making me think about the stuff that we throw out or the stuff that we want to hide. I won't go into the whole thing, but about darkness, right? And how being kind to ourselves and kind to other people, particularly in dark times, right? And the things that we want to hide, the things that we reject, the things that we throw away, right? Which are so often the things that we need compassion for, can allow something really amazing to happen, right? Whether it's kind of the simple but not so simple process of compost turning into something wonderful, or this crazy thing that happened under my sink, which was just like, you would never believe that like this old cruddy piece of purple cabbage could make this beautiful flower. It was just like this little miraculous thing happened. But nature does that kind of stuff all the time. It's, you turn around and there's like mold that's incredibly beautiful, or, some kind of fungus happens. But it was about and self-compassion as a tool, like the self-compassion meditation, and how that, again, going back to kind of the research, how that very simple meditation builds resilience, right? It builds resilience. It helps keep us from taking on too much of other people's stuff, right? Going into that empathic place that can lead to overload, right? That can lead to burnout, and how we can be in that place of healthy compassion rather than empathic overload, and compassion fatigue. And so that's kind of another whole area. That's the next thing that's coming out. But there's little bits of all of that in here. So it is kind of like, I think you're right in that if you're looking to, I want to have a regular spiritual practice, I would like to have something and make it easy, this might be a good thing for you. If you kind of want to dabble and see what happens, that's also fine too, because I do think there's this, when you put yourself in a place where you're open to listening, there's things kind of pop up that you need, this kind of synchronous thing. I know when we have like a group circle, it's always amazing to me how people have interesting and similar experiences in their journeys. Not just like the answers to what comes, but like, oh, there's an owl in a third of the people, they have an owl come in their journey, or they have whatever, some other thing. And it's very affirming, right? It's like, oh, we're having some kind of group energy that's potent, right? Or like we're just talking about now. I mean, not that self-compassion is such an unusual thing to come up, two people like you and I talking, right? That's not like oh, wow, that's so amazing. But it's still synchronous.
Oh, without a doubt.
It has a resonance to it.
Without a doubt. And it's interesting too, just I'm getting back to the animal theme for a moment, because, we're both huge animal people. Again, a lot of people are. You were talking at the beginning about this kind of very pure connection between people and animals. It's almost like the normal barriers between people are not there when people allow themselves to connect to animals. And whether it's the kind of inherent qualities within us that make us resonate with certain animals, or whether it's literally meeting and attracting a lot of animals. And you were talking about this kind of group, kind of like access to something more collective, right? This kind of spiritual thing that's more collective. And I can't tell you how many people I meet who happen to also have, had a lot of random encounters with specific types of animals. And, there is this kind of resonance, I think, that draws us together. I think when people start doing these practices, they attract more of those types of experiences.
Yeah.
And interesting synchronicities. You're making me think back to, this is probably 20 years ago. I had a period where I had a lot of cats, like big cats, in my dreams. Mm-hmm. I was like, they would come and go. It wasn't all the time. And I was driving to the Omega Institute, which is well-known holistic center. And, here I am in traffic on a road that wasn't super busy. And there's a truck in front of me, and it has this massive, I think, leopard on the back, and a spotted leopard, and some other thing drove by, and there was this black panther, and they had been coming to me in my dreams. And I thought, that's really uncanny. And I wound up, spur of the moment, kind of signing up for a shamanic journey session. And, the woman was drumming, and the cats came in. And later on, when I was a trainee and I was about to do a year in pediatric oncology with children who had a range of conditions, including many that were, not going to leave the hospital. And I had this incredibly vivid dream with big cats in it. And I looked up the symbolism. And I know you said these animals we can think of as individuals, not just as symbolic. But there was something, one of the meanings, and I'm going to not get this completely right, but something about connection to not like being brave in the face of adversity, but also to like a guide to the underworld, basically. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, how timely, because I hadn't known that before.
Right.
When you're talking about the types of practices that you're talking about, even if people just engage in them to foster greater creativity, right? To think more symbolically, it is so interesting, the types of synchronicities and things that come up. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if there's a particular guide or experience that you would want to share, and there's no pressure. And I know it's personal, so don't feel pressure.
It's interesting. I'll pick one that I share in the book or something it is a very personal choice, right? So, and what I usually would advise people about when they have an experience with a helping spirit is to check with them, right? Because it is kind of a sacred and intimate connection. So I think that there are some traditions or some teachers who would say, never reveal your helping spirit. I think that, for me, I have some who it's like, yeah, you don't talk about me. There are others that don't seem to really care. I tend to think of it as you want to be judicious about it, right? This is not like you're at the bar and you're having a conversation and you're like, hey, you're just talking about it. But if you're, talking with somebody who's a kindred spirit in a kind of sacred context, if you have permission to talk about it, then that's different. So to be thoughtful about what you share, right? As we should be thoughtful about what we share about our personal conversations. This is a real side tangent, but I'm amazed about what people share about private conversations that they have with other people, right? Like the integrity of keeping a confidence is important. So, you talk. I think your segue from big cats is probably works well. I'm looking at one of my big cats right here, and I do write about this in the beginning of Shamanism for Every Day, so it's not a big secret. And this one I'm allowed to share, but in my very first shamanic journey, a tiger showed up, and that journey for me was, absolutely like this coming home experience. Everything about it was so familiar and so powerful. And it was with family and it was with friends, in ordinary reality and in non-ordinary reality. But this tiger, I think I mentioned this earlier, had been showing up in meditations for years. And I didn't quite have there wasn't the structure to be able to say, oh, I'm going to formulate a question, right? Or we're going to have this kind of interaction. But there was always this like very kind of visceral, loving, protective presence, right? Meditation, journeying, kind of same thing, right? The journeys allowed everything to kind of move to the next layer of, I want to say reality. Reality feels like it's a little bit overused. Everything became more tangible and more fleshed out. It kind of moved from like the glimpse of a meditation, like, oh, I see you, I feel you, to like, oh, this is where this is the whole thing, and we can do things together and we can communicate together, and I can, like, there's your fur, like really, really.
It became really real.
Really real. Yeah, in a different way. But it was so confirming. That's one of those things that, and it wasn't like in that journey I said, oh, I want to go meet that tiger that I've seen in meditation. Like, it didn't occur to me. It just, so I think one of the questions that people often ask when they're, either taking their first journey or just in the beginning of this practice is, am I making all this up? And Michael Harner gave some very good advice in the beginning. He would say, just tell yourself you are making everything up so that you stop asking that question. And I think that can be helpful in a couple of ways. One, just so that you're not having that dialogue with yourself, particularly while you're in a journey experience of worrying about it. Number two, because on some level, does it really matter? If you're getting helpful information, I mean, like, on the one hand, of course it does. Like, we want to know what's real and what's unreal. But on the other hand, as long as you are bringing all of your senses, right? You want to bring all of your resources, particularly when you're asking questions. Like, we won't go too far into this, but like, don't take a journey for the first time and then go make some huge life decision, right? Based on this like spirit that you've like just met for the first time, right? Like, you've got to use your reason. You've got to, right? But if you're getting great advice from your imagination, maybe that's okay. Right? But on the other hand, and then the reason why I brought that up is I think over time, when people really stick with the practice, things happen that reassure them. And they say, I really don't think I could have made that up. Like, this is so, things happen in their real, their waking life later on. Or like for me, the two tiger experience that I was like, I didn't make that up. Right? Or if I did, it came from so far down. Right? It wasn't a conscious summoning. So I'll never forget that.
And something that you mentioned as you're talking about meeting this tiger that really became so real, and because it is real, it's a part of your spiritual landscape. Mm-hmm. Something that you mentioned in the book, I thought was really, again, it was one of those things that's really important that I think a lot of times we might not think about it. But as we go into that kind of sacred space and connect with, whether it feels like an angel or your higher self or another guide or an animal spirit, you mentioned that it's important not to only commune or seek them out when something's wrong.
Right.
Because in a real world mundane relationship, it wouldn't be much of a relationship if the only time you interacted with someone was when you needed something.
Right.
And I thought, man, that is so it's so important. And it's kind of like one of those things where you're like, oh, I could have had a V8. How did I not think of that before?
Right.
But it's true. And this might seem like a little bit of a stretch, but even when, speaking with somebody about doing other important practices like meditation, or even if you take it out of the spiritual realm, you just say stress reduction.
Right.
And I've had people say, well, I was having a panic attack because I was on a bus and I was going to be late for work. And I tried to do this meditation thing and it didn't work. Right. And then you say, oh, well, what about the other times when you are practicing? How is it then? And they're like, well, I don't ever do that unless I'm already panicked or unless something's really wrong. And you wouldn't have you wouldn't go to your best friend only when you needed their support, I hope. And same thing with these beings in your inner landscape, for lack of a better word on my part. You probably have a better word.
No, I think that's right. I mean, because the person wouldn't be your best friend if you just showed up when you needed something. That's not a relationship, right? I think that the spirits I think they have a lot more patience with us than human beings generally would. Like maybe unless you're a parent, because that's just how it's supposed to be, right? So I don't think. What was that?
And you have to be super patient.
And you just need to be patient because you're supposed to give to your kids, right? It's not supposed to be like an even thing. And I think that to a certain extent, there is that imbalance, with, beings who have showed up to help us. I don't think they expect it to be even necessarily, but I do think it can be kind of a sign of I think we're babies. Like I don't think I can say that for myself. I don't understand how everything works, right? I don't know. I don't know the whole spiritual world. I think when we really think we know how everything works, I think we get into trouble.
So glad you said that. So important. I always tell people, like, if somebody acts as though they know everything there is to know, run.
I 100% agree with you.
Because it means you're not open anymore and you're not learning. And what you're saying is your journey is ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our journeys can be ongoing.
100%. And I think that's, what we think of the nature of reality, of our own spiritual practice. If we're not willing to take on new information and change our opinion, I think that's a big problem, right? And there's a balance between. I mean, I'm a very kind of left brain, right brain person, right? So I believe in science. I also have faith, right? Like I have these, and I think lots and lots of people do. I mean, you clearly are that way. I'm sure the people who listen to your podcast are that way. Part of science is taking on new information and growing. But I think part of faith can be that way too. Right? Faith doesn't have to be, this is it, and I'm never gonna change.
Or expand or grow.
And
or ask questions.
Yeah. So I do think that part of that is, how do we show up in new ways? How do we engage in new ways? Are we always gonna be in the position of, oh, I want something, in that kind of supplicating or parental way of, I need something right now? Or are we going to create some other dynamic?
Be curious.
Yeah.
Listen.
What can I do? What can I do for you? Fill in the blank. Spirit of nature, or again, and whatever word, there's always I'm always kind of struggling with how does this word fit or not fit? People who connect with the angelic realm, celestial being, whatever you're connecting with, what can I do in return? Is there something? Maybe there isn't. maybe they don't want anything from you. How can I honor you? How can I, how do we exchange, right? I mean, there's so many, we think about even just ways of, having good relationship, but also, there's some like healing practices where you want to have some kind of exchange. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be this, but we're creating a dynamic that's back and forth, right?
You're making me think of something. And, this is actually, again, in the mundane world, but I feel that connecting with nature has become more of a part of my spiritual connectedness. And so we moved over the summer to a house where there are beehives, and we were very excited to become the stewards of the beehives. So for me, as you're talking, I'm thinking symbolically, I'm thinking, what could a spirit want from us? They're kind of like, they kind of don't need food,
Okay.
But if you think about it, like I was thinking that might mean planting something that the bees can use for food. And I planted certain plants that I know bees like. Mm-hmm. It sounds probably a little simple to a lot of people, but sometimes like you're honoring nature around you, or the divine in nature can be something as simple as planting something.
Yeah.
As not spraying something that's harmful to plant and animal life, that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be this massive, impossible undertaking. And it can be executed in real life.
Yep.
And physical, concrete, present moment outside of the mind life.
Yep.
So Mara, I wanted to ask you, is there anything that I didn't ask you or that we haven't spoken about that we should? Am I leaving anything out?
Well, I guess I would invite any of the listeners to, we talked about this idea of synchronicity and people who, kind of when they start engaging in, journeying or meditating, like these things rise up. And, I think sometimes, as you mentioned, people start finding more and more people. I also think sometimes people can start to feel a bit of a loneliness because they have the sensitive side, the spiritual side, the, whatever label you want to put on it. And maybe they don't have people in their life that feel safe to share that with.
So important and so true.
So, I would just want to invite, if anybody, has that feeling, I do have an open circle, once a month. That, it's free, people can leave a donation if they want to, but there's no pressure to do that. And we do a journey. It's loosely based on the book. So I kind of draw from that. You don't have to have any journey experience. But people are more than welcome to join that. So, I don't know if you're going to like put my website somewhere, but
absolutely.
Did I say that?
And I wanted you to actually, that was going to be my next question.
Okay.
Where can people find you? You also offer a particular type of counseling that you have created. People can find out more about your published work, your speaking engagements. Where is the best way for them to find out more about you and to follow you?
Everything is at wholespirit.com, WHOLESPIRIT.com. And there's a calendar listing there to, join a circle if you want to. There's a listing for a couple of books that I have out, for the new audio program that's coming out in the spring that's about burnout prevention and working. We haven't really touched a lot, and I know we're kind of at our time for today on the whole idea of energetic boundaries. Like that's a huge part of what I do, is helping people who are sensitive or empathic have more control over their energetic boundaries, so that we can be kind of more deliberate stewards of what we are taking into our body. And that's a part of shamanic healing as well, as how we are either, maybe we've become a little bit dispirited right? Through times of trauma, maybe we've become disconnected from some of our own spirit, lost some of our own personal power, or maybe we've taken on some spirit, that's some energy that isn't ours. And what do we do about that? What are the effects of that? So that's a big area, maybe a conversation for another time. But the energy ecosystem classes that I have and the Shining Bright Without Burning Out audio course that's coming out is a toolkit to help have better control over that for yourself.
You'll definitely have to come back and talk more about that. And I want to acknowledge that you brought that up because it's so important when people start doing more spiritual work and also doing more work that can be very hypnotic, they can feel more open in both a good way and a less good way.
Yeah.
And helpers and healers, people who do healing work or just natural helpers can be very sponge-like.
Yep.
So I think it's really important to talk about that. I would love to talk to you more about that when your course comes out, because it's just kind of good psychological and energetic hygiene, I think.
It really is. Yeah.
So related to that, I guess one last thing is in your book, you have a prompt where people can learn to be a helper that is not, to find the right balance between giving and not overgiving, not trying to take care of the whole world because we can't, and having good boundaries and being able to compassionately say no. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember exactly what page that's on, but I did see that. And I think it's really so useful.
Yeah. Finding that balance is tricky for some of us, but really important.
Yeah. So important. Well, Mara, thank you again for coming on and talking today about your book and your work. It's really exciting. I'm so happy for you that this has come out, and I think it's going to be a really nice introduction or a way of continued practicing that's really digestible and doable and allows people to kind of use more of them in terms of their spiritual practice. So thank you so much for being here. So nice to see you.
Wonderful to see you, Tracy.
And please thank Luna for joining us before. Anybody who sees the YouTube version will see that before Luna kind of walked right across the screen, gave you a little rub and went by. And it was always so exciting.
I'll let her know that you enjoyed it.
Please do. If you like the podcast, please remember to like and share and follow. This has been another episode of Unpacking Possibility. If you want to learn more about Mara Bishop, please remember to go to her website, wholespirit.com. If you want to learn more about me, you can find that on my website. And until next time, be well.